Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Charts with Dan. The summer movie season is winding down. I know some people might say the dog days of summer are over. Well, they extend well into August here in Arkansas. The temperatures outside are into the triple digits every day, and I have contracted my least favorite kind of cold, which is the summer cold. This is all just in a big vice grip right now, so I'm going to do my best not to sound too husky in this video, and also not to sound too much like Chucky from Rugrats. But luckily, I've got box office numbers to distract me. And even though all of the big releases of the summer have already hit theaters, the ones that came out in July are still playing very well. So let's look at the last weekend at the box office. Led, of course, by Spider-Man Brand New Day in its third weekend of release. It was a 51% drop from its second weekend, and it brought in $70.7 million in weekend number 3. It's now at $786.5 million domestically. It has passed Avatar on the all-time domestic grosser list. So safe to say that it's doing pretty well. We're going to dive into that number a little bit later in the show. The Odyssey, in its fifth week of release, dropping just 25.6%. So it's really hanging in there. For another $23.6 million, it's now over $500 million domestically. So $500 million domestic, hanging in well in second place. Coming in not too far behind, though, is The End of Oak Street, which opened to $21 million. That's an okay number for this movie. Not disastrous, not spectacular. It actually got a lot of competition from another dinosaur film, Paw Patrol, the Dino movie, which brought in $20.2 million in its opening weekend. Just on a personal note, I had a chance to take my youngest nephew to his first ever movie in theaters this past weekend, and it was Paw Patrol, the Dino movie. The movie was cute, but it was a lot more fun watching him watch a movie on the big screen for the first time. If you've never had a chance to do it, I highly recommend it because it is a special experience. It's what it's all about. In fifth place was Cat's Eye Wild Hearts, which opened at $3.95 million. It's a documentary about the girl group Cat's Eye, which was formed out of the reality show Dream Academy. I don't know what any of that means, but I'm sure a lot of other people did because it's in the top 5. At number 6 is Six, the musical, live. That's an appropriate position for it. At just over $3 million, it's a pro shot of the musical that premiered in the UK, I believe, a few years ago. At number 7 is the latest from Angel Studios, the historical drama The Brink of War, which opened to $2.68 million. Toy Story 5 hung around the top 10 for another week. Its 9th weekend of release. It brought in another $2.4 million. It's also trying to hit that $500 million domestic mark. One Night Only did not have a good weekend, especially for a rom-com. A 63.6% drop in weekend number 2. That is the kiss of death for a movie like this, which many have affectionately called the sex purge. It made $2 million. It's at $9.8 million domestically. So not a hit there, although certainly a notable film for a lot of people. And at number 10 was the film from India called Vishwanath and Sons, which brought in $1.63 million. It is a Tamil language romance about an Olympic athlete who reconnects with his son's mother. We actually had 6 movies drop out of the top 10. I had to make its own graphic. This is only the second or third time this has ever happened. Minions and Monsters out of the top 10 after 6 weeks. Moana exits the top 10 after just 5 weeks. The Invite also spent 5 weeks in the top 10 after its initial expansion. And then we have 3 movies out after just 1 week. Super Troopers 3, Ice Cream Man, and Cat Video Fest 2026. Looking at the biggest theater count changes this past weekend, Ice Cream Man by far had the most. It lost over 1,000 theaters and is now in just 660. So a lot of theater owners had no patience for Eli Roth's latest and dumped it at the earliest available opportunity. Moana lost 985 theaters. It's now in 1,480. Minions and Monsters lost 857 theaters. It's still in 1,594. Toy Story 5 lost a chunk of theaters, 735 of them. It's still in 1,925. And Hadestown the Musical lost most of its remaining theaters. It lost 390. It has 91 remaining. This is what this past weekend looked like compared to the same weekend in 2025. And you can see that we are still having an August for the record books. This past weekend was 80% above where we were on the same weekend last year, which is when Weapons was dominating the box office. And the degree looks a little bit smaller because the spike goes so high with the opening of Spider-Man Brand New Day, but still an 80% year-over-year increase as far as the box office goes. those. That is pretty impressive. We are on track for our first $1 billion grossing August since 2016, and that's helped a lot by the fact that Spider-Man really only had one release day in July. The rest of it's all been in August. And if we keep the same pace, we could well be on the way to the highest grossing August on record ever. So not just an increase over last year, but an increase over history. So that's pretty good. This is what the summer domestic box office looks like. Of course, Spider-Man Brand New Day is locked in there at number 1, but the Odyssey has passed Toy Story 5. It's now the second highest grossing film of the summer. That moves Toy Story 5 down to number 3. Obsession is pretty locked in there at number 4, followed by The Devil Wears Prada 2, which I'd say is locked in at number 5. Then we have Backrooms at number 6. Minions and Monsters moves up 1 spot to number 7. The Mandalorian and Grogu moves down 1 spot to number 8. And then Moana and Disclosure Day round out the top 10. Again, barring a huge box office surprise, I think this is going to be your box office top 10 for the summer. But again, let's wait till we get to the end of the month before we make definitive pronouncements there. And here is, once again, a reminder of my predictions. Right now, I've got 1 movie out of 10 correct. And if something comes up and passes Disclosure Day, I'll have guessed no movies in the correct spot. I've got 8 out of 10 as far as picking them in the summer itself, but yeah, a lot to process, and I am already prepping my wrap-up video for the end of the summer. You'll see that probably in a couple weeks, so don't worry. That is already well in process. And part of that is gauging what you thought of this past summer, and that takes us to our member poll question for this week. Other than Obsession's box office run, because that would be the easy answer to this question. So putting that aside, what was the most surprising success at this year's summer box office? That could either be an unexpected hit or a film that succeeded beyond expectations. You can leave your answer now in the member poll on the YouTube page. I will ask you to please scan the answers before you type in, because if your answer is already there, upvote that answer instead of leaving it again. It just makes the results a lot easier to tabulate when I do the final results. And if you're not a member yet here on the channel, you can check the description below on how to do that. You get to do a member poll here on the channel each and every week. You also get early access to some of my videos, custom badges and emoji to use in the chat. I love hearing your voice each and every week here on the show. And if you become a member, you can add your voice to that chorus of others. All right, let's break down a little bit about Spider-Man's third weekend. First of all, it had the second best third weekend of all time at $70.7 million. That's impressive, but it's a little less than $20 million behind what Star Wars The Force Awakens did on the first weekend of 2016, which was its third weekend. Brand New Day comes in a little bit ahead of Avatar, a little bit ahead of Avatar The Way of Water, a little ahead of Black Panther. It comes in ahead of Avengers Endgame and Infinity War, ahead of the Super Mario Brothers movie, Inside Out 2, and Spider-Man No Way Home, which had a $56 million third weekend that kicked off on New Year's Eve back in 2021. Now, if you adjust for inflation, and this is where it gets interesting, Spider-Man Brand New Day actually doesn't make the top 10. If you look at third weekends all time, inflation adjusted. Star Wars The Force Awakens is still number 1 at $130.6 million adjusted for inflation. Then we have Avatar back on the first weekend of 2010 at $109 million. And then we have 2002's Spider-Man with the third best third weekend of all time, adjusted for inflation, at $89.7 million, followed by Black Panther and the Avengers. Avengers Endgame comes in 6th, followed by Infinity War. Then we have Titanic. This is where I think you see, when you do inflation-adjusted numbers, some of those generational runs starting to gather steam. So the fact that Avatar shows up here when it wasn't on the best second weekends of all time, even adjusted for inflation. Titanic shows up here for the best third weekends of all time. This is where you start to see a lot of those titles pop up, because it's not just that they had a big opening and then the second weekend was a bit of a carryover from that big opening and then they started dropping in weekend 3. These are movies that either had smaller openings or they had second and third weekends that matched what they did in their opening weekend. And that's one of the reasons I like to look at inflation-adjusted numbers, is it just kind of helps put things in a little bit of perspective. So we see Avatar, The Way of Water, and Titanic here. Titanic with an $81.2 million third weekend adjusted for inflation, followed by Avatar The Way of Water and Jurassic World rounding out the top 10. So Spider-Man Brand New Day is not too far off this list, but it does not make the top 10 adjusted for inflation. One list that it is climbing up, though, is the highest grossing domestic films of all time. It is now at number 4. It has snuck past Avatar. It is about $30 million behind Spider-Man No Way Home, then $80 million behind Avengers Endgame, and then we'll see what happens with Star Wars The Force Awakens, and that's something we're going to look at here on the show. This is the cumulative gross day by day of Spider-Man Brand New Day versus the now top 3 all-time domestic grossers. Last week it was against the top 5 because it hadn't passed Top Gun Maverick and it hadn't passed Avatar. It now has, so it only has 3 movies to look at right now. The green line there is Spider-Man Brand New Day, and you can see that it really started in lockstep with Avengers Endgame. It has increased its lead over Avengers Endgame since it opened in the last 17 days. It has pretty much maintained the lead that it has over Spider-Man No Way Home, so I think it's on track to pass the domestic grosses of both of those films. But the interesting thing is The Force Awakens. I said on last week's show, I'm not ready yet to say that Spider-Man Brand New Day is going to be the new domestic champion of all time. And that's because look at the last 10 days or so. Those are what you call holiday legs, because on The Force Awakens release structure, the last 10 days or so have been Christmas Eve, the days after Christmas, the days leading up to the New Year. That is what holiday legs will do for you. And you can see that it has substantially closed the gap between Brand New Day and itself over the last 10 days or so. And if that trend continues, then Brand New Day will be the second highest grossing film of all time domestically. And again, this is unadjusted for inflation. But this is why I was never really riding too hard on the Brand New Day is going to pass The Force Awakens train. Now, it could still. The big box office days of The Force Awakens are now behind it. The big days where it was making $15, $20, $25, $30 million a day, whereas Brand New Day wasn't making anywhere close to that. Those are in the rear view, but now it's just about the day-by-day incremental things. 500,000 here, 800,000 there. That's what is going to end up determining which movie ends up at number 1. If I was going to place a bet, I'd say Force Awakens remains the champion. But of course, I will track this over the next days, potentially weeks, and we will see exactly where Spider-Man Brand New Day falls on the all-time domestic grosser list. As far as the MCU goes, Spider-Man Brand New Day is now the 3rd highest grossing film in the long storied history of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and it is closing in on Spider-Man No Way Home. I think by next week's show, it'll be at number 2 at least. I don't know if it's going to bank $80 million between now and next weekend, but you never know. But it is quickly moving up to number 1 on that list. When you look at it adjusted for inflation, this is interesting. Spider-Man Brand New Day is at number 6 right now. It's ahead of Deadpool and Wolverine, Avengers Age of Ultron, Iron Man 3, and Captain America Civil War. And if you look at those grosses, it's sort of at the top of the second tier, because Brand New Day is at $786.5 million. Infinity War is at $906.9 million adjusted for inflation. So there is about a $100 million gap there, a little bit more than $100 million. It was more than that before Brand New Day came along. And that's what's going to be interesting to see. If Brand New Day can get up over $900 million and sort of join that top tier, that elite tier of Infinity War, Black Panther, The Avengers, Spider-Man No Way Home, and Avengers Endgame. Not that it won't be a success if it doesn't, but this is the thing I'm going to be interested to see. Again, when we talk about inflation-adjusted numbers, is whether or not Brand New Day can get into that sort of ultra-elite tier of MCU films. This is what Brand New Day looks like against the rest of the Spider-Verse. It is less than $30 million away from taking that number 1 spot, where No Way Home currently sits at $814.8 million. It's number 2 ahead of Spider-Man from 2002, Spider-Man Far From Home, and Across the Spider-Verse. When you adjust for inflation, it's actually not that far back. It's at number 3 and well ahead of Spider-Man 2, which is the 4th place film. And it's interesting because 2002 Spider-Man, adjusted for inflation, has a very similar gross to No Way Home, unadjusted for inflation. So if Brand New Day makes about another $30 million, it will supplant Sam Raimi's original to be number 2 on this list, and likely end up in 2nd place behind Spider-Man No Way Home, which I think, given the hype and the size of the movie, I think that sounds appropriate to me. There's another more low-stakes record that Spider-Man Brand New Day is chasing, and that's the most days at number 1 since January 1st. So each individual day, how many of those days have movies spent at the number 1 spot? Right now, the champion is Super Mario Galaxy, which spent 23 days at number 1. Then we have Avatar Fire and Ash, which spilled over into January from December and spent 20 days at number 1. Right now, Spider-Man Brand New Day is in third place with 17 days at number 1. It should be able to do the next 6 pretty easily. And then it's all about the next weeks after this upcoming weekend and the days after that. The Odyssey right now in fourth place with 14 days at number 1. Then we have Michael, which had 13 days at number 1. Send Help and Toy Story 5 both had 12 days at number 1. And then tied with 10 days at number 1, we have Wuthering Heights, The Devil Wears Prada 2, and Obsession, which is tied there at number 10. And we've talked about this on the show before. The notable thing about Obsession is it didn't open number 1. And I think that every other movie on this list did open at number 1. It never won the weekend box office, and none of these days were actually weekend days. Obsession's 10 days at number 1 were all weekdays. So it is the outlier here as far as every other movie. And again, it's just kind of an example of how special that movie's box office run has been. All right, let's talk a little bit about The Odyssey, which is currently Christopher Nolan's second highest grossing film domestically. It's cracked the $500 million barrier. It's only the second Christopher Nolan film to do that after The Dark Knight. And it's less than $30 million away from passing The Dark Knight to become Christopher Nolan's highest grossing domestic film. It looks like it is going to do that. Now, when you adjust for inflation, it's a little bit of a different story. It's still over $500 million, of course, but it is about $180 million behind The Dark Knight Rises and more than $300 million behind The Dark Knight. So not a failure by any means, but again, this puts it in a little bit of perspective if you were to kind of equal things out with the inflation adjustment, just where it really stands compared to The Dark Knight. A success, but not an absolute pop culture phenomenon like The Dark Knight was. And that brings us to our trivia question for this week. Spider-Man Brand New Day and The Odyssey have been number 1 and number 2 for 3 consecutive weekends. This has happened 7 other times since 2020. What were the other movie pairs? So it's not just 2 movies that were both number 1 and number 2. They have to stay in the same spot. So it's 2 movies. One of them was number 1 for 3 weeks. One of them was number 2 for 3 weeks. What were those movie pairs? I'll give you a chance to think about it. Pause if you need to. Here's the answer. It is the Super Mario Galaxy movie and Project Hail Mary earlier this year. Moana 2 and Wicked back at the end of 2024. Mean Girls and The Beekeeper at the very beginning of 2024. Kind of this was right after the strikes, so there wasn't a lot going on at the box office. Then we had Spider-Man No Way Home and Sing 2 back around the holidays in 2021. Raya and the Last Dragon and Tom and Jerry back in 2021, back when the box office was trying to get back on its feet. Then we go to the middle of the pandemic when Tenet and The New Mutants were number 1 and number 2, largely because they were pretty much the only 2 new movies in theaters. They were actually number 1 and number 2 for 4 weeks. And then back to the very beginning of 2020 before theaters shut down, where Bad Boys for Life and 1917 were actually number 1 and number 2 for 3 consecutive weeks. And while we're on the trivia question, I actually have to go back and correct last week's trivia question because it was heinously wrong. And this is, I talk about how difficult it is to do this show when the box office resources are severely lacking. I was using Box Office Mojo as my primary resource tool because, as I've said on the show before, AI is absolutely useless for box office research, even as an assistant. So I was doing everything manually, and I was looking at the top grossing movies of the summer year by year on Box Office Mojo, and I wasn't thinking critically, and the numbers on Box Office Mojo are just so wrong, just so drastically wrong, and I passed that on to you, the viewer, for which I apologize. So this is the corrected version of last week's Charts with Dan trivia question. Since 1975, 11, not 8, as I think I said last week, 11 domestic summer box office champions have been original films, meaning not a sequel, reboot, remake, part of an ongoing franchise or universe, or officially based on or adapted from pre-existing material or IP. What are those movies? Now, I don't include Tenet in 2020 because there was no real summer box office season in 2020. So this is not including Tenet. And the actual answers are The Omen, which was on my list last week, Star Wars, which I talked about Star Wars in that episode already, and I didn't even think about the fact that it was missing. Raiders of the Lost Ark, which was not on the list last week, E.T. the Extraterrestrial, Ghostbusters, Back to the Future, which I didn't even realize was missing from last week's list, Ghost, The Lion King, Independence Day, Saving Private Ryan, which was replaced by Armageddon. Both of those movies qualify, but Box Office Mojo listed Armageddon as the highest grossing film of summer 1998, and Finding Nemo, which is the last time it happened, again, if you don't include Tenet, and that was over 20 years ago. So those are the actual answers to last week's Charts with Dan trivia question. I apologize. I do try to get everything that I can as accurate as I can, but sometimes things just fall through the cracks. I'll try to do better for next time. All right, let's take a look at some of the other movies in the top 5, and we will start with The End of Oak Street, which kind of lives in the shadow of the first and second place films. Like I said, it's not a spectacular opening for the film. It didn't have a catastrophically high budget, but it doesn't have the earmarks or the signs of a summer breakout either. Audience response was somewhat muted. Critical response was pretty good, but it did have one of the better openings for an original film in 2026, so it's got that going for it. And again, original meaning not part of a universe or a franchise or based on historical events or based on a book or an article or an unpublished book or anything like that. These are the top openings for original movies in 2026. Hoppers is at number 1 at $45.3 million. Disclosure Day close behind at $44.5 million. But The End of Oak Street had the third best opening for an original film this year, although a distant third at $21 million. That puts it in ahead of Send Help in fourth place and Obsession in fifth place, which only opened to $17.1 million, but ended up way outgrossing every other movie on this list. The Drama comes in sixth place, followed by Primate at number 7, Mercy at number 8, Undertone at number 9, and Passenger at number 10. So horror, once again, really dominates the original movie category as far as number of entries year in and year out. And while we're talking about The End of Oak Street, let's go to our member poll question from last week. I asked, not including the Jurassic Park or Jurassic World movies, what is your favorite movie about or featuring dinosaurs? And I left it open-ended, and I was really interested to see the answers because they're very open-ended answers. The number one answer by far was The Land Before Time with 54 votes. I know it would probably be in the mix, but I didn't think it would dominate like this. King Kong, but not the original. Peter Jackson's King Kong from 2005 comes in second place with 20 votes. Then we have Toy Story at number 12. I mean, Rex is in it. It does feature a dinosaur, so technically it does qualify. Meet the Robinsons comes in at number 11. Then we have Disney's Dinosaur at number 9. And also at number 9 is The Velocipaster, which is sort of a well-known bad movie on the internet. At number 6 is what I thought was pretty obscure animated film, We're Back, A Dinosaur Story, which is from the early 90s, I believe. And then at number 6 is Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, which does also have a dinosaur in it. I have to say as a cinephile that my feelings are a little bit hurt that 2005's King Kong got 20 votes and the original couldn't even get into the company of The Velocipaster. But hey, I get it. It is what it is. And with the open-ended questions, you never know what kind of answers you're going to get. Speaking of dinosaurs, Paw Patrol had a new movie out this weekend called Paw Patrol the Dino Movie, and this is the franchise tracker for Paw Patrol. When you rank it by domestic opening, it's a pretty consistent franchise. 2023's Paw Patrol the Mighty Movie still has the franchise best opening domestically at $22.7 million, but the Dino Movie came in pretty close behind at $20.2 million. And then we have Paw Patrol the Movie back in August of 2021. Again, the box office was still finding its feet back then. It brought in $13.1 million, and I think under regular circumstances, that opening would have been a lot closer to the other two films. Also, with Toy Story 5, it is still in the top 10, and it has now actually tied Michael with 9 weeks in the domestic top 10 for the third longest run in the top 10 so far this year. If it can spend one more week in the top 10, it will tie Project Hail Mary for second place. If it can spend 2 more weeks in the top 10, it'll tie Obsession for first place. And then we've got some movies that are coming up this list. The Odyssey and Spider-Man will soon be aiming to add to this list in the next few weeks. So that's what's going on domestically. Let's turn now to the international box office, which is all markets outside of the US and Canada. And the number 1 and number 2 films, not shockingly, are Spider-Man Brand New Day and The Odyssey. Spider-Man Brand New Day brought in $118.7 million internationally. The Odyssey actually had a business increase. It was up 24% from last weekend, and that's because it opened in China this past week. It didn't have a massive opening like we saw with Spider-Man, but it did bring in enough business to post a week-over-week increase internationally at $98.2 million. It actually saw a lot of competition from a Chinese film called Once Upon a Time in the Middle East, which played in IMAX and was much more successful, or at least popular, in China this past weekend. It brought in $66.7 million. So the days of Hollywood blockbusters kind of having free reign in China, those days are largely over, although the Odyssey did get a meaningful release and a release in IMAX in China. The End of Oak Street brought in $26 million internationally, and Paw Patrol, the Dino movie, which got a week's jump on the domestic release by releasing internationally a couple weeks ago, brought in $23 million. That was a 32.6% decrease from the week before. When you take those numbers and combine them with our domestic numbers, we get our top 10 movies worldwide. And Spider-Man Brand New Day led the way with $189.4 million, which takes it over the $2 billion mark. It is now one of 8 movies ever to cross $2 billion worldwide. The Odyssey with an overall 9.8% increase of business to bring in $121.8 million. It's nearing $1.3 billion worldwide. Once Upon a Time in the Middle East comes in third place at $66.7 million. It's now at over $130 million just from Chinese release alone. The End of Oak Street with a total gross of $47 million in its worldwide opening. That's okay. Not great. Not terrible. Paw Patrol, the Dino movie, had an overall increase of 55.5% because of its opening domestically to bring in $35.7 million worldwide. It's now at $68.7 million globally. Awarapan 2 comes in sixth place at $13.25 million. This is a sequel to the 2007 original film, which I believe is called Awarapan. So good enough for a sixth place opening there. All Wishes Come True, which is also doing well in China, brought in $12.65 million for a $233.8 million global total. Vishwanath & Sons brought in $12.3 million when you take in all worldwide markets. Toy Story 5 brought in another $9.5 million. It's at $1.1 billion now. And Minions & Monsters brought in $8.1 billion. It's now getting close to $500 million worldwide. And Spider-Man Brand New Day's third weekend of global release was the 9th best performance for any film so far this year. So its first and second weekends were the first and second best performances for any film so far in 2026. And its third weekend was the 9th best performance for any film so far in 2026. The top 5 are rounded out by the opening of the Super Mario Galaxy movie, as well as the openings of Toy Story 5 and the Odyssey. The Devil Wears Prada 2, Michael, and the second weekend of the Odyssey are at number 6, 7, and 8. And then we have Avatar Fire and Ash at number 10. That was its spillover weekend, the first weekend of the year back in early January. And I mentioned that Spider-Man Brand New Day has cracked $2 billion. Well, that means it is also now one of the 10 highest grossing films of all time globally at $2.02 billion. It has passed Spider-Man No Way Home globally and its worldwide gross, bumping it down to number 9, and it bumps Zootopia down to number 10. And in the next few days, it's going to pass Avengers Infinity War. It is going to pass the global gross of Star Wars The Force Awakens. And then we get to some heavy hitters because Titanic, Naja 2, Avatar The Way of Water, Avengers Endgame, Avatar, those are all up in the $2+ billion range. So it's going to be interesting to see where Spider-Man Brand New Day ends up falling on the all-time global top 10. As far as MCU worldwide grosses, it is currently the third highest grossing MCU film globally, one of only 3 to crack $2 billion. Again, it's going to shortly pass Avengers Infinity War, and that puts it behind only Avengers Endgame. And the Odyssey is also closing in on a record. It's at $1.29 billion, which means that it is now less than $50 million away from breaking Deadpool and Wolverine's record as the highest grossing R-rated film of all time worldwide. And I see no reason why it's not going to get that record. So Christopher Nolan could be taking another number 1 spot in the record books in the very near future. And he'll have 2 of the top 5 highest grossing R-rated movies of all time between the Odyssey and Oppenheimer. Well, last week we looked a little bit at Spider-Man Brand New Day and its profitability, and I just wanted to update it because this is how phenomenally successful it is. In just the last week, of course, it has brought in hundreds of millions of more dollars. And according to my profitability estimate, Spider-Man Brand New Day has now brought in over $500 million in theatrical profit so far. So this counts nothing other than ticket sales, which means that every other revenue stream for Spider-Man just gets added to this pool, and every dollar it makes also gets added to this pool. So this is a massive moneymaker for Sony, by extension, a massive moneymaker for Disney because of their interests in the deal and also Spider-Man being a part of the MCU. So yeah, Over $500 million in just clean profit for Spider-Man Brand New Day, and that's after 17 days of release. I also wanted to revisit the Odyssey's profitability chart, and I got some feedback on it. Last week, when I looked at the film's theatrical profitability, I took Christopher Nolan's cut out of the theatrical profit before I gave the final number because I thought, well, we know that he's taking the money out. But there was some feedback, people saying, well, there's other movies that have back-end deals and money coming out. And I defended it at first saying like, well, yeah, but we don't know what those are. We know what Nolan's are. But it is true. The only difference is that we do know what Nolan is taking. So what I've decided to do is represent the Odyssey's theatrical profit before taking Nolan's cut out. But I also wanted to put just how much he's getting of that theatrical profit. So this is the latest profitability chart for the Odyssey. You can see that based off of its nearly $1.3 billion gross, I'm projecting a theatrical profit of $213.3 million, with the caveat that Christopher Nolan, according to the 20% of the net gross before studios take their cut, is in line to receive about $117.6 million of that. So a little less than $100 million going back to the studio. Nolan actually right now making off better than the studio, or making out better than the studio, although the studio is going to get all the other ancillaries and whatnot. This is a win-win scenario. The studio makes a bunch of money. Nolan makes a bunch of money. Pop the champagne. Everybody's doing great on the Odyssey. So that's what's going on around the world. Let's return to the domestic box office and take a look at what I call some of our specialty charts. And we'll start with the top per theater averages for this past week. At number one was the documentary, and it is a powerful documentary out of Sundance called American Doctor, which made $41,104 playing in one theater. I don't know what the theatrical model on this is going to look like. Usually these don't get wide releases, but I mean, I think you should see it anyway because I think it's an important subject matter and it is a very powerful message. It's tough to watch, but I think in many ways essential. But I also believe this is going to be a must-watch for awards purposes because it's hard for me to believe that this documentary is not going to be a major awards player. Tony comes in second place. It expanded to 37 theaters and brought in $19,000 per theater. It's going to have a further expansion this upcoming weekend. Teenage Sex and Death at Camp Miasma expanded to 54 theaters and brought in $16,494 per theater. It's also expanding in the next couple weeks. Spider-Man Brand New Day stays on the chart at $15,578 per theater in each of its 4,500 plus theaters. And the movie Late Fame, which was on this chart last week, stays on the chart. It's in 4 theaters and brought in $8,211 per theater. These were the top films in limited release this past weekend, which I define as fewer than 1,000 theaters. At number one was Vishwanath & Sons, which was a top 10 movie at $1.63 million. Right behind was the 10th anniversary of Your Name, which played in 675 theaters and brought in $1.58 million. So it was very close to being a top 10 movie this past weekend. The Rivals of Amziah King also brought in over $1 million in 632 theaters. Teenage Sex and Death at Camp Miasma brought in $890,000 in 54 theaters, and Tony brought in $700,000 in 37 theaters. As we get to the end of the summer, this is where we start to see the limited release market come alive with all of the awards hopefuls, etc. It's kind of slow during the summer, but this is where we start seeing the big numbers week to week on this chart. This is what the 2026 domestic box office looks like so far this year. Spider-Man Brand New Day is at number one. The Odyssey moves up to second place. Toy Story 5 is down in third. The Super Mario Galaxy movie and Michael are at numbers 4 and 5. Star Wars, The Mandalorian and Grogu is now out of the 2026 domestic top 10. So a Star Wars movie is not going to be a top 10 grossing movie of the year. It was knocked out by Minions and Monsters. Then we have Backrooms, The Devil Wears Prada 2, Obsession, and Project Hail Mary making up the rest of the top 10. This is what the worldwide box office looks like so far this year. Of course, Spider-Man Brand New Day up there at number one at over $2 billion. The Odyssey approaching $1.3 billion at number two. Toy Story 5 over $1.1 billion at number three. Michael and the Super Mario Galaxy movie clustered very closely together, both just over $1 billion. Then we have The Devil Wears Prada 2, Project Hail Mary, Pegasus 3, Obsession, and Minions and Monsters. And this is something I've been tracking for the last few weeks. These are the highest grossing actors of the year at the domestic box office. I'm not going to update this every single week. I'm only going to show you when something has changed. Now, the top 5 are the same from when we looked at this chart last week, with Zendaya, Tom Holland, Jon Bernthal, Benny Safdie, and Mark Ruffalo. Spider-Man doing a lot of heavy lifting there, the Odyssey as well. The cast of Spider-Man Brand New Day, so it's all the cast members who aren't individually kind of taken out and enumerated in their own slots, is now at number 6 at $786.5 million. Anne Hathaway moves up to number 7. Her fourth movie, The End of Oak Street, has put her at nearly $750 million in domestic box office this year, and getting close to Spider-Man Brand New Day, but really like 4 Anne Hathaway movies can't even match what one Spider-Man movie has done. That's not anything against her. That's just kind of amazement at Spider-Man. Melissa Villaseñor moves down to number 8. Robert Pattinson stays at number 9. And the cast of The Odyssey, including Matt Damon and Elliot Page, Lupita Nyong'o, everybody who doesn't have their own individual slot on this list, they're now at number 10 with a domestic box office of over $500 million. So that's what's going on at the box office. Before we go, let's take a look at the latest from the world of streaming. And we'll start with the latest numbers from Netflix. New ones will be out later today. This covers the week of August 3rd through the 9th. And the most watched Netflix program was the debut of The Last House, which brought in 27.54 million views. It stars Greta Lee and Wagner Moura as a couple and their family who are trapped maybe forever in their house. It's kind of a mystery thriller. I've been meaning to check it out. I haven't watched it yet, but it looked interesting to me. 72 Hours starring Kevin Hart is at number 2 with just over 11 million views. Then we have The Idaho Murders Season 1 at number 3 with 10.5 million views. My Life with the Walter Boys Season 3 debuts in 4th place with 9 million views. In keeping with what we've seen so far, this is down from the Season 2 debut of the same series. It was down about 3 million views from its Season 2 premiere. Elise, Shadows of a Woman rounds out the top 5. Then we have The Bombing of Pan Am 103, a Netflix docuseries about the bombing of the Pan American flight over Lockerbie, Scotland back in 1988. It brought in 6.46 million views. Then we have 2 Tom Holland Spider-Man films, Spider-Man Far From Home and Spider-Man Homecoming, both right around 5 million views at number 7 and 8. A Toxic Love Story is at number 9, and My Daughter's Father rounds out the top 10. Let's look now at the latest numbers from Nielsen. Now, these are domestic numbers only, and they're delayed by about a month because that's how Nielsen rolls. So this is the week of July 13th through 19th. And let's look at the most watched streaming movies. At number 1 was Project Hail Mary at 11.65 million hours watched. Obsession debuts in 2nd place. This is when it hit Peacock at 7.6 million hours watched. Shipwreck Nightmare at Sea comes in 3rd place. Then we have the debut of Descendants Wicked Wonderland on Disney Plus at nearly 6 million hours watched. It's the 5th Descendants film, and the series focuses on the kids of famous Disney villains. I hear the kids love it. I've never actually seen any of them. The Sheep Detectives is in 5th place, followed by Avatar Fire and Ash. Then we have The Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Maybe some people doing some cramming for the new Hunger Games movie coming out later this year. The Boss Baby, which we've seen on this list a lot, returns at number 8. Voicemails for Isabel jumps back on the list at number 9. And Hoppers is also back on the list at number 10. These were the most watched streaming shows for July 13th through the 19th. At number 1 is Little House on the Prairie at 19.58 million hours watched. The Big Bang Theory coming in a close 2nd place at 17.9 million hours watched. SpongeBob SquarePants returns to the chart at number 3 at 16.75 million hours watched. Then we have the debut of Will Ferrell's new Netflix series, The Hawk, at 16.65 million hours watched. House of the Dragons at number 5. Ride or Die, the Amazon original streaming series, debuts at number 6 at 14.48 million hours watched. Bluey's at number 7. The Last Ship is at number 8. Criminal Minds returns at number 9. And Grey's Anatomy is at number 10. And these were the top streaming shows when you look at it by watch time per available episode. So you take the number of hours watched divided by the number of episodes you can watch. That's how you get this number. Little House on the Prairie also leads in this category at 2.45 million hours of watch time per episode. Ride or Die comes in 2nd place at 1.81 million hours per episode. Then we have The Hawk in 3rd place at 1.67 million hours per episode. Worst Neighbor Ever comes in 4th at 1.5 million hours of watch time per episode. Then we have The 5-Star Weekend at 1.26 million hours per episode. And I Will Find You is also over a million hours per episode at 1.23 million. Then we have House of the Dragon at 720,000 hours per episode. Avatar The Last Airbender at over 400,000 hours per episode. Silo coming in at 284,000 hours per episode. And The Last Ship at just over 200,000 per episode. And those are all the numbers I have for you, thankfully, because my voice is on its last legs. But before we go, I just wanted to give you an idea of some things you can watch both at home and in theaters this upcoming week. First of all, today on Tuesday, you can rent or purchase Toy Story 5 to watch at home. On Thursday, Passenger, which is one of the horror movies that came out earlier this summer, will be available on Paramount Plus. And then there are many things hitting theaters this upcoming weekend. Insidious Out of the Further will be in theaters. This is the 7th Insidious film, which finds people still venturing into the further, except I guess this time ghosts can come back, which I thought they already could, but maybe I'm wrong. This is the 7th movie. You got to work with what you have. It Ends will also be in theaters around the country this weekend. It's about a carload of young folks who get trapped in what seems like an endless looping road where strange and terrible things happen. This is the writing and directing debut of Alexander Ulam, who went to Florida State Film School. So shout out to a fellow Knoll. I might have to check this one out just in solidarity. Mutiny will also be hitting theaters. It's the latest from, Jason Statham. He's a former Marine, surprise, who boards a big boat to find and track down the men who framed him for murder. I might have to see this just for the guilty pleasure of it all. It's from Jean-Francois Richet, who also directed the movie Plane, which begs the question why this movie isn't just called Boat. That is a golden missed opportunity there. This movie opened in theaters earlier this year. It's called The Magic Faraway Tree. I think it's already been out in the UK for several months. It stars Claire Foy and Andrew Garfield, who play parents who move their family to the countryside where they encounter strange and magical things. It is from writer Simon Barnaby, who also wrote Paddington 2 and Wonka. Also in theaters this weekend is Spa Weekend, starring Isla Fisher, Anna Faris, Michelle Buteau, and Leslie Mann, who play friends trying to get away. This is from the writer and directors of Bad Moms. And in a lot of theaters, you can also see, this hurts, the 25th anniversary of The Fast and the Furious. We're getting to the point now where movies are having 25-year re-releases. These aren't movies that came out when I was a kid. They're movies that came out when I was a whole-ass adult, because I remember going to see The Fast and the Furious in theaters with a friend of mine who shall remain nameless, because we were in what I would call an altered state of mind when we saw The Fast and the Furious, and this was maybe the most altered of that particular type I had been to that point in my young life. And I will say the first 45 minutes of The Fast and the Furious were incredible. And then things calmed down a little bit and they weren't as great. But 25 years ago, that's insane. I am so old. Also expanding to many theaters around the country is Tony, so you can check your local listings, and Mother Mary, starring Anne Hathaway, will be hitting HBO Max. So if you don't want to catch any of the other 2 Anne Hathaway movies in theaters, you can catch Mother Mary on streaming this upcoming weekend. And that's everything I've got for you on this week's Charts with Dan. Please be sure to stay tuned right here for the latest in movie news, reviews, box office, and more. If you haven't hit that subscribe button, be sure to hit the subscribe button so you know when I upload a new video. But most of all, thank you for watching this video. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you then. Bye.